The morning it all started, I was standing in my corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the sunrise paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of amber and gold. At 58, I still arrived at Meridian Capital before anyone else, still reviewed every portfolio personally, still remembered when this firm was just 3 desks in a cramped Brooklyn apartment. My coffee was still steaming when my assistant Marcus knocked and entered with that particular expression that meant family drama was about to crash into my carefully ordered world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Your daughter-in-law is here, he said, his voice carrying the kind of diplomatic neutrality he'd perfected over 15 years of working for me. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent family business. I glanced at my Cartier watch, a gift I'd bought myself when Meridian first hit 50 million in assets under management. 8:15 in the morning. Vivian had never set foot in my office before, had barely acknowledged my existence beyond obligatory holiday pleasantries. Whatever brought her here at this hour, it wasn't going to be pleasant. Send her in, I said, settling into my chair and closing the Forbes article I'd been reading about women over 50 dominating the venture capital space. The irony wasn't lost on me. Vivian walked in like she owned the place, which was particularly galling considering she'd never worked a day in her privileged life. She was 32, blonde in that expensive salon way that costs more than most people's monthly rent, and dressed in what I recognized as a custom Hermès suit. Her engagement ring caught the morning light, a 4-carat diamond that my son Tyler had somehow afforded on his nonprofit salary. I'd learned not to ask where that money came from. Eleanor, she began, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited. We need to talk about the trust fund. I leaned back, fingers steepled. Tyler's trust fund had been established when he turned 18. A substantial nest egg designed to mature when he reached 40. He was 35 now, married to Vivian for 3 years, and had been making increasingly frequent hints about early access to what would eventually be a 7-figure inheritance. The trust fund isn't accessible for another 5 years, I said calmly. You know, Vivian's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Actually, there are provisions for early release in cases of medical emergency or educational advancement. I've had our lawyer review the documents. Our lawyer, the presumption was breathtaking. I drafted those trust documents with some of the best estate attorneys in the country, and I knew every clause, every contingency, every protection I'd built in. What kind of emergency are we discussing? I asked. She leaned forward, her expression shifting into what I assumed was meant to be vulnerability but came across as practiced manipulation. Tyler and I have been trying to start a family. We've been seeing specialists. The treatments are expensive, and my father thinks it's time Tyler started acting like a real provider instead of playing social worker. The dig was subtle but unmistakable. Tyler worked for a housing nonprofit, earning $42,000 a year helping homeless veterans find permanent housing. It was work that mattered, work that made a difference, but in Vivian's world impact couldn't be measured in dollars, so it didn't count. Fertility treatments can be costly, I acknowledge, but they're hardly grounds for breaking a trust fund designed to ensure Tyler's long-term financial security. Vivian's mask slipped slightly. Eleanor, let me be direct. My family has certain expectations. My father didn't invest in Tyler's future just to watch him play house with the homeless. There are opportunities in real estate development, proper business ventures that could set us up for life, but we need capital. The truth was finally emerging. This wasn't about fertility treatments or medical emergency. This was about Vivian's father, Richard Blackstone, whose development empire was built on leveraging other people's money for his own project. I'd heard whispers in financial circles that his latest ventures were highly leveraged, that he was looking for fresh capital to prop up some questionable investments. I see, I said quietly. And what exactly does your father expect Tyler to invest in? A commercial development project in Connecticut, luxury condominiums, shopping complex, the works. The returns could be substantial. We're talking about turning Tyler's trust fund into real wealth, not just some static inheritance gathering dust. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street below where early morning commuters hurried along the sidewalks, ordinary people going to ordinary jobs, living ordinary lives funded by their own efforts, something Vivian would never understand. The trust fund exists to protect Tyler from exactly this kind of pressure, I said without turning around. From family members who see his inheritance as their opportunity. Family members? Vivian's voice rose slightly. Eleanor, I'm his wife. We're building a life together. This isn't some scheme. It's planning for our future. I turned back to face her. Planning that conveniently benefits your father's business interests. The pretense finally dropped completely. Vivian stood up, her hands planted on my desk as she leaned forward. Look, Eleanor. I'm going to be blunt here. Tyler loves you, but he's not a child anymore. He's a man who deserves to control his own financial destiny, and frankly, the way you hoard control over every aspect of his life is becoming a problem. Hoard control. You still approve his major purchases. You still get copies of his bank statements. You still treat him like he's 12 years old instead of a grown man with a wife who has her own family's interests to consider. I returned to my desk, opened Tyler's file and pulled out the monitoring reports I received quarterly. These bank statements show a pattern of increasingly expensive purchases: a Rolex, a lease on a BMW, dinners at restaurants that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month, all on a non-profit salary. Vivian's jaw tightened. My family helps us maintain a certain standard of living. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with living beyond your means while pressuring me to break a legally binding trust to fund your father's business venture. She straightened, her tone turning icy. You know what, Eleanor? I've tried to be respectful here. I've tried to approach this as family. But maybe it's time someone said what everyone's thinking. I waited. You're stuck in the... You built this company in a different era, when women like you had to claw and scratch for every opportunity. But that's not the world we live in anymore. Tyler and I represent the future, and you're holding us back with your ancient way of thinking about money and family. Ancient. The word hung in the air like a challenge. You sit in this office, playing with other people's money, acting like some financial wizard, but when it comes to your own family, you're just a bitter old woman who can't stand to see the next generation succeed. The silence that followed Vivian's little speech stretched long enough for her to start looking uncomfortable. I'd learned decades ago that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Let people hang themselves with their own words, my mentor used to say. Give them enough rope and they'll always choose to use it. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened my laptop. Marcus, I called through the intercom. Could you please escort Mrs. Harper to the elevator? Vivian's face flushed. We're not finished here. Actually, we are. I looked up at her, my voice calm and level. The trust fund remains intact and inaccessible until Tyler's 40th birthday. That's final. She grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with barely contained fury. This isn't over, Ellen. Tyler deserves better than a mother who treats him like property instead of a person. After she left, I sat in the quiet of my office, her words echoing in my mind. Ancient, bitter old woman, stuck in the past. The dismissive cruelty of someone who'd never built anything, never earned anything, never risked anything, telling me I was irrelevant. I pulled out my phone and called Tyler. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm and familiar. Mom. Hey, how's your morning go? Your wife just paid me a visit. There was a pause. Oh, about the trust fund thing. The trust fund thing. Another pause. Longer this time. She mentioned she might talk to you about some opportunities. I told her it probably wasn't worth pursuing. But you know, Viv, when she gets an idea in her head. Tyler, do you want early access to your trust fund? I mean, it would be nice to have some flexibility. Vivian's dad has some interesting projects going, and we've been talking about investing in our future. But I know you set it up the way you did for good reasons. The careful diplomacy in his voice told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't Vivian operating alone. This was a coordinated campaign, with Tyler caught in the middle, trying to keep everyone happy. What kind of project? Real estate development, commercial properties. Vivian's dad says with the right initial investment, we could see serious returns, like life-changing money. Life-changing money. He was already making $42,000 a year doing work he loved, work that mattered. But apparently that wasn't enough anymore. And the fertility treatments, well, we've been talking about starting a family. It's not like we're in a huge rush, but Vivian thinks we should be proactive about exploring our options. Translation: They weren't actually trying to get pregnant, but it made a convenient excuse for needing immediate access to substantial funds. Tyler, I need you to be honest with me. How much pressure is Vivian's family putting on you about this? It's not pressure, Mom. It's just her dad has had a lot of success in business. He thinks I'm wasting my potential working at the nonprofit, and maybe he has a point. I mean, I love what I do, but it's not exactly setting us up for the kind of future Vivian's used to. The kind of future Vivian's used to. Not the kind of future Tyler wanted, but the kind Vivian expected him to provide. The distinction was important. That evening, I drove out to Tyler and Vivian's house in Westchester. They'd moved there 6 months after the wedding, trading Tyler's modest apartment in Queens for a colonial that cost 3 times his annual salary. Another gift from Vivian's family, another chain linking him to their expectations. Tyler met me at the door, his smile slightly strained. Mom, you didn't have to drive all the way out here. We could have talked on the phone. I wanted to see you in person. The house was beautiful, I had to admit. High ceilings, crown molding, a kitchen that belonged in a magazine, but it felt staged, like a showroom rather than a home. There were no books visible. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. No personal touches that reflected Tyler's interests or personality, just expensive furniture and abstract art that looked like it had been purchased by a decorator rather than chosen by people who actually lived there. Vivian appeared from the kitchen, her expression carefully neutral. Eleanor, what a surprise. I thought we could continue our conversation from this morning. Of course. Tyler, why don't you open some wine? I think we're going to need it. We settled in the living room, Tyler pouring Bordeaux that probably cost more than most people spent on a week's worth of groceries. I noticed he filled his glass higher than usual. So, Vivian began, have you had a chance to reconsider our proposal? I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about being ancient, about holding back the next generation. Tyler looked uncomfortable. Mom, I'm sure Vivian didn't mean. Actually, she was quite clear about what she meant. I turned to Vivian. You think I'm an outdated obstacle to your financial ambitions? Vivian's smile was razor thin. I think you're a woman who's used to being in control, and you're having trouble accepting that Tyler is old enough to make his own decisions about his financial future. Financial future that conveniently aligns with your father's business interests. My father is a successful businessman who's offering Tyler an opportunity to learn from his experience. Some people might see that as a gift. I took a sip of wine, considering my next words carefully. Tell me about your father's current projects. He's developing a mixed-use complex in Hartford, luxury residences, high-end retail, office space. It's exactly the kind of forward-thinking development that's going to define the next decade of real estate. And how much initial investment is he looking for? The minimum buy-in for serious investors is $500,000, but with Tyler's trust fund, we could go higher, really establish ourselves as major players. $500,000, nearly 3/4 of Tyler's entire trust fund, sunk into a single project run by a man I'd never met, in a market I hadn't researched, with no guarantees and no protections. Have you seen the prospectus? I asked. Vivian waved a hand dismissively. My father doesn't work with prospectus. This is private development, family investors, much more exclusive than the kind of institutional investing you're used to. No prospectus, no documentation, no legal protections, just handshake deals and family connections. Everything my decades in finance had taught me to avoid. Tyler, I said, turning to my son, do you understand the risks involved in this kind of investment? He shifted uncomfortably. Vivian's dad has explained it all. The returns could be substantial, and it's not like we'd be putting all our eggs in one basket. Actually, that's exactly what you'd be doing. You'd be taking a trust fund designed to provide you with long-term financial security and gambling it on a single real estate project with no legal documentation and no oversight. Vivian's patience finally snapped. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Eleanor. You're so focused on worst-case scenarios that you can't see opportunity when it's staring you in the face. My father has built a $40 million company. He knows what he's doing. Built on whose money? Excuse me. Your father's company, how much of it was built with his own capital versus leveraged investments from other people? Vivian's face flushed. That's how business works. You use available capital to maximize returns. It's not like he's running some kind of Ponzi scheme. I didn't say he was, but I am saying that Tyler's trust fund isn't available capital for your father's business ventures. Tyler finally spoke up, his voice strained. Mom, I appreciate everything you've done for me, I really do, but Vivian's right about one thing. I am old enough to make my own financial decision. You are, but this specific fund isn't yours to decide about until you're 40. That was always the agreement. An agreement I made when I was 18 and didn't know anything about money or investing or planning for a family. An agreement designed to protect you from exactly this situation. Vivian leaned forward, her eyes bright with anger. Protect him from what? From having a wife who comes from a family that understands how to build wealth, from opportunities that could set us up for life. Protect him from family members who see his inheritance as their lottery ticket. The words hung in the air like a slap. Tyler's face went pale, and Vivian's mouth opened and closed without sound. That's enough, Tyler said quietly. Mom, I think you should go. I stood up, setting my wine glass on the coffee table. I think you're right. As I reached the door, Vivian called out, Eleanor. Wait. I turned back. You should know that we've already consulted with an attorney about contesting the There are provisions for demonstrating undue influence in trust creation, especially when it comes to elderly parents exerting control over adult children's financial autonomy. Elderly parents, another carefully chosen insult wrapped in legal language. Good luck with that, I said, and walked out. The drive back to Manhattan gave me time to think. Vivian wasn't just after Tyler's trust fund, she was after Tyler himself. She wanted to remake him into someone who fit into her family's world, someone who valued money over purpose, status over integrity, and she was using his love for her, his desire to be a good husband, to manipulate him into betraying everything he'd once believed about what mattered in life. But calling me ancient, dismissing my experience as irrelevant, threatening legal action to break a trust I'd carefully crafted to protect my son from exactly this kind of predatory behavior, that was a mistake, a big one. I'd built Meridian Capital from nothing, survived 3 recessions, navigated dozens of hostile takeovers, and emerged stronger every time. I'd learned to read people, to spot weakness, to identify leverage points that others missed. And Vivian, for all her entitled confidence, had just revealed exactly how vulnerable she really was. The next morning, I arrived at the office even earlier than usual and called my head of research. Patricia, I need a comprehensive background check on Richard Blackstone and Blackstone Development Group, financial records, litigation history, investor complaints, the works. I want to know everything. How deep do you want me to go? Deep enough to find whatever he's trying to hide. While Patricia worked on Blackstone, I called my estate attorney, Margaret Chen, who'd helped me structure Tyler's trust fund 15 years earlier. Eleanor, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? Someone's threatening to contest Tyler's trust on grounds of undue influence. I need to know how solid our documentation is. Undue influence. Eleanor, Tyler was represented by independent counsel when he signed those documents. He was over 18, mentally competent, and the trust was structured for his clear benefit. Unless there's evidence of coercion or deception, that's a losing argument. What about claims that I'm exercising inappropriate control over an adult child's financial autonomy? Margaret laughed. That's not how trust law works. The whole point of a trust is that someone else controls the assets until specific conditions are met. If adult children could break trust simply by claiming their parents were too controlling, the entire estate planning industry would collapse. So if they actually file a contest, they'll lose, and they'll owe legal fees to both sides. It's a nuisance suit at best. That was reassuring, but I wasn't content to simply wait for them to make their move. If Vivian wanted to play hardball, I was going to show her what real leverage looked like. Patricia's research came back faster than I'd expected, and it was more damning than I'd hoped. Richard Blackstone's company was indeed worth $40 million, but $35 million of it was debt. His last 3 projects had gone over budget, and behind schedule. Two of his investors had filed lawsuits alleging misrepresentation of financial projections, and most interesting of all, he was currently in default on a $12 million construction loan that was scheduled for review in 6 weeks. The Hartford project Vivian had described was real, but it was also Blackstone's last chance to avoid bankruptcy. He needed fresh capital, not to offer Tyler an opportunity, but to save his own company from collapse. Tyler's trust fund wasn't an investment, it was a bailout. I printed out everything Patricia had found and locked it in my personal safe. Then I made one more call. Tyler, it's Mom. Can we meet for lunch? Just the two of us? I don't know if that's a good idea right now. Vivian's pretty upset about last night. I'm sure she is, but this is important, and it's something I need to discuss with you privately. There was a long pause. Okay, but somewhere neutral, not your office, not our house. We met at a small bistro in Midtown, the kind of place where the tables were far enough apart for private conversation. Tyler looked tired, older than his 35 years. Marriage to Vivian was aging him in ways that his demanding nonprofit work never had. Mom, before you say anything, I want you to know that I love you, but I also love Vivian, and I can't keep being caught between you two. I understand, and I love you too, which is why I need to show you something. I slid a folder across the table. Richard Blackstone's financial records. Tyler's face paled. Mom, you had Vivian's father investigated. I researched a business opportunity that my son was considering investing in. That's basic due diligence. He opened the folder reluctantly, his expression growing more troubled as he read. The lawsuit documents, the defaulted loans, the pattern of over-leveraged projects and angry investors. This can't be right, he said finally. Vivian said, he's worth $40 million. He is, but he also owes $35 million. Tyler, this Hartford project isn't an investment opportunity, it's a rescue operation. Your father-in-law needs fresh capital to avoid bankruptcy, and he's using your wife to get it. Tyler closed the folder, his hands shaking slightly. Even if this is all true, it doesn't mean the project won't work out. Sometimes businesses go through difficult periods. Tyler, look at me. I waited until he met my eye. If you were still working as a financial counselor, and a client brought you this investment proposal, what would you tell them? He was quiet for a long time. Before marrying Vivian, Tyler had spent 2 years working for a financial literacy nonprofit, helping low-income families avoid predatory lending and investment scams. He'd seen firsthand how desperate people made bad financial decisions, how smooth-talking con artists exploited trust and family relationships. I'd tell them to run, he said quietly. Then why is this different? Because she's my wife, because her family has been good to us, because I don't want to believe that the woman I married would lie to me about something this important. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Tyler, I don't think Vivian knows the full truth about her father's situation. I think she believes what she's telling you. But that doesn't make it any less dangerous. So what am I supposed to do? Go home and accuse my wife's father of being a con artist? You're supposed to protect yourself and your future. The same way you'd advise any client in this situation. Tyler pulled his hand away and stood up. I need to think about this. Of course you do. But Tyler, please promise me you won't sign anything or make any financial commitments until you've had time to process this information. He nodded reluctantly and left, taking the folder with him. I sat alone at the table, finishing my untouched sandwich and thinking about what came next. I'd given Tyler the truth, but truth and acceptance weren't the same thing. He was going to have to choose between protecting his financial future and keeping peace in his marriage, and given how completely Vivian had wrapped herself around his sense of identity as a husband, I wasn't sure which way he'd choose. That evening, my phone rang. Vivian's name appeared on the screen. You had my father investigated, she said without preamble. Her voice was cold, controlled, dangerous. I researched a business opportunity. You violated our family's privacy. You invaded our personal lives. You treated us like criminals. I treated you like people asking me to break a legal trust and invest in an undocumented business venture. Basic background research seemed prudent. Tyler's devastated. He can't believe his own mother would go behind his back like this. Is that what he said, or is that what you told him he should feel? There was a long pause. When Vivian spoke again, her voice was different. Harder, more honest. Let me be very clear, Eleanor. You've crossed a line here. Tyler is my husband, not your little boy. His financial future is our decision, not yours. And if you think you can manipulate him with some selectively edited documents and scare tactics, you're more delusional than I thought. Selectively edited? Corporate finances are complex. My father has explained the whole situation to us. He's restructuring some debt as part of a strategic expansion plan. It's completely normal for successful businesses. I almost laughed. Vivian was either remarkably naive or remarkably committed to her lies. But it didn't matter which, because the result was the same. Vivian, your father is 6 weeks away from defaulting on a $12 million loan. The Hartford project is his only hope of avoiding bankruptcy. Tyler's trust fund isn't an investment. It's a bailout. You're wrong. The documentation is all public record. Lawsuit filings, loan default notices, SEC complaints. Your father's company is hemorrhaging money, and he's using you to pressure Tyler into bailing him out. Even if that were true, which it's not, it's still Tyler's decision to make, not yours. Actually, it's not Tyler's decision. The trust fund is legally protected until he turns 40. That was always the arrangement. Vivian's mask finally slipped completely. Fine, you want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. I'm filing a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office, alleging elder financial abuse. Elder financial abuse? You're using your control over Tyler's inheritance to manipulate his marriage and personal relationship. You're isolating him from his wife's family and interfering with his autonomous financial decision-making. In New York State, that's considered a form of elder abuse. The irony was breathtaking. Vivian was accusing me of the exact behavior she'd been demonstrating for months. Good luck with that, I said, and hung up. But as I sat in my apartment that night, looking out at the city lights, I realized Vivian had just made a critical error. She'd escalated from private family pressure to public legal threat. She'd moved the conflict into a realm where I had decades of experience, and she had none. And most importantly, she'd forced Tyler to choose sides in a way that would make it impossible for him to stay neutral. If Vivian wanted to make this about legal leverage and public accusations, I was going to show her exactly what those weapons looked like in the hands of someone who actually knew how to use them. The war was just beginning. The next morning I arrived at my office to find Marcus waiting with an expression I'd never seen before. In 15 years of working together, he'd maintained perfect professional composure through market crashes, hostile takeover attempts, and family emergencies. But today, his usual calm had cracked around the edges. Eleanor, we have a situation, he said, following me into my office. Someone filed a complaint against you with the State Attorney General's office. They're opening an investigation into allegations of elder financial abuse. I set my briefcase down carefully, my mind already shifting into crisis management mode. How did you find out? They called this morning, requesting documentation related to Tyler's trust fund. I told them they'd need to go through legal channels, but they said this was just preliminary fact-gathering. Marcus handed me a printed email. They're specifically asking about patterns of financial control and interference with family relationships. I scanned the document, noting the formal language and official letterhead. Vivian had moved faster than I'd expected, and she'd chosen her weapon carefully. An elder abuse investigation would create a public record, potentially damage my professional reputation, and force me into a defensive position while she continued pressuring Tyler. Marcus, call Margaret Chen and tell her we need an emergency meeting, then get Patricia on the line. I want a complete financial forensic analysis of Blackstone Development Group, not just the public records, bank records, investor communications, internal documents, everything. That's going to be expensive. Not as expensive as letting Vivian destroy my family and my reputation. Margaret arrived within an hour, her expression grim as she reviewed the complaint documents. This is nuisance litigation at its worst, she said. The allegations are completely without merit, but defending against them is going to be time-consuming and invasive. What's their strategy? They're hoping to pressure you into releasing the trust fund to make the investigation go away. It's essentially legal extortion. Margaret set the papers aside. But Eleanor, there's something else you need to know. They've also filed for a temporary restraining order to prevent you from accessing or modifying the trust fund during the investigation. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Can they do that? Temporarily? Yeah. If a judge believes there's evidence of financial abuse, they can freeze the assets until the investigation is complete. You'd still be the trustee, but you couldn't make any changes to the structure or the beneficiaries. How long could an investigation like this take? 6 months to a year, depending on how cooperative everyone is. A year. Vivian was counting on me, getting tired of the legal battle, tired of the professional embarrassment, tired of watching my relationship with Tyler deteriorate while she whispered poison in his ear. She wanted me to choose between my principles and my peace. She'd made a serious miscalculation. Margaret, I want you to file a countersuit, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted extortion and filing false legal documents. I want Vivian and her father personally liable for every dollar this costs me. Eleanor, that's going to escalate this significantly. Good. They started a war and I intend to finish it. After Margaret left, I called Patricia into my office. What did you find on Blackstone? She spread a thick folder across my desk, her expression troubled. It's worse than we thought. Richard Blackstone has been operating a classic Ponzi scheme for the past 5 years. He's been using new investor money to pay returns to previous investors while siphoning funds for personal expenses. How much personal expenses? $2.7 million over 3 years. Luxury cars, jewelry, a vacation home in the Hamptons. He's been living like a king while his investors' money disappears. I studied the bank records Patricia had obtained, noting the pattern of transfers and the increasingly desperate attempts to attract new capital. What about the Hartford project? It exists, but it's never going to break ground. Blackstone doesn't have the permits, the zoning approvals or the construction financing. He's been selling investment shares in a project that can't legally be built, so if Tyler had given him the trust fund money, it would have disappeared within 6 months, and Tyler would have had no legal recourse. Blackstone's been careful to structure everything through shell companies and offshore accounts. I leaned back in my chair, processing the full scope of what Vivian's family had tried to do to my son. This wasn't just about pressuring me to release trust fund money. This was about destroying Tyler's financial future to prop up a criminal enterprise. Patricia, I want you to compile everything we have into a comprehensive report. Bank records, investor statements, property documents, everything. Then I want you to deliver copies to the FBI Financial Crimes Division, the SEC Enforcement Office, and the State Attorney General's White-Collar Crime Unit. You're going to destroy them. I'm going to save Tyler from them. There's a difference. That afternoon I drove to Tyler's office at the Veterans Housing nonprofit. I'd visited him there only a few times over the years, respecting his desire to keep his professional life separate from family complications. But today I needed him to see the truth in an environment where Vivian's influence couldn't interfere. The building was modest, a converted warehouse in Queens with exposed brick walls and industrial light. Tyler's office was on the 2nd floor, barely large enough for a desk and 2 chairs, but the walls were covered with thank you letters from veterans who'd found permanent housing through his programs. This was the work that mattered to him, the career that gave his life meaning, and Vivian's family wanted him to abandon it for their criminal schemes. Mom? Tyler looked up from his computer, surprised. What are you doing here? I needed to talk to you somewhere private, somewhere away from Vivian. His expression darkened. If this is about the investigation, I already know. Vivian told me she had to take legal action to protect our interests. Tyler, sit down, please. I handed him Patricia's report, watching his face as he read through the documentation of his father-in-law's crime. The bank records showing missing investor funds, the property documents proving the Hartford project was legally impossible, the pattern of fraud stretching back years. This can't be right, he said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. Your father-in-law is running a Ponzi scheme. The FBI is opening an investigation based on evidence I provided this morning. Within a week, his assets are going to be frozen and his investors are going to start filing lawsuits. Tyler's hands shook as he set the report aside. Does Vivian know? I don't think so. But Tyler, it doesn't matter what she knows. What matters is that you were about to hand over your entire financial future to a criminal. Even if this is all true, I can't just abandon my wife. She's going to need support when this comes out. Of course she. But Tyler, you need to understand something. This investigation Vivian filed against me, it's not about protecting your interests, it's about buying her father time to steal more money before the authorities catch up with him. Tyler's face went pale. What do you mean? The elder abuse complaint is designed to freeze your trust fund and create a legal distraction while her father liquidates whatever assets he can salvage. You're not his investor, Tyler, you're his mark. I pulled out my phone and showed him a screenshot from Vivian's social media account, posted just that morning. She was at a luxury spa in Connecticut, getting a massage and facial captioned, "Self-Care Sunday while the lawyers handle family drama." She's treating your inheritance dispute like an inconvenience that's interfering with her spa day. Tyler stared at the image for a long time. I need to go home and talk to her. Tyler, before you do that, I need you to understand something. When Blackstone's scheme collapses, everyone who was involved is going to be investigated, including Vivian, including you if you're financially connected to them. I haven't given them any money, but you've been living in a house they paid for, driving a car they leased, eating at restaurants they funded. If federal investigators decide you were complicit in the scheme, your career is over. No nonprofit is going to employ someone under federal investigation for financial crime. The full weight of his situation was finally hitting him. Tyler had spent 3 years living beyond his means, accepting gifts from people he thought were generous family members, not realizing he was being groomed to become the primary victim in a sophisticated fraud. What am I supposed to do? You're supposed to protect yourself, distance yourself from Blackstone's business interests, cooperate with the federal investigation, and stop letting your wife use your love for her to manipulate you into making decisions that could destroy your life. Tyler's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression grew even more troubled. It's Vivian. She wants to know where I am and when I'm coming home. She says we have important decisions to make about our legal strategy. Tyler, whatever decisions she wants to make, they're not in your best interest. They're in her father's best interest. He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. 3 years ago, I thought I was the luckiest guy in the world. Beautiful wife, comfortable life, family that accepted me. How did I miss all of this? Because you're a good person who assumes other people are good too. There's nothing wrong with that, Tyler. But there's also nothing wrong with protecting yourself when you realize you've been wrong about someone. That evening, I returned to my apartment and found Margaret waiting in the lobby with urgent news. Eleanor, we have a problem. Vivian's attorney filed an emergency motion, claiming you're trying to hide assets and obstruct their investigation. They're asking for immediate appointment of an independent trustee. Based on what evidence? Your decision to contact federal authorities about Blackstone. They're claiming it's retaliation designed to intimidate their witnesses and interfere with their elder abuse investigation. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. So reporting a Ponzi scheme to the FBI is now evidence of elder abuse. That's essentially what they're arguing. Eleanor, I have to ask, are you sure you want to keep escalating this? We could probably negotiate a settlement that would satisfy everyone. Margaret, what kind of settlement? Partial early release of the trust fund, maybe $200,000. Enough for them to feel like they won something, not enough to seriously damage Tyler's financial future. I walked to my window and looked out at the city skyline, thinking about everything that had brought us to this moment. Vivian's entitled demands, her casual cruelty, her willingness to destroy Tyler's relationship with his mother to fund her father's criminal enterprise, the way she'd called me ancient, dismissed my experience, treated my love for my son as a character flaw to be exploited. No settlement, I said finally. If Vivian wants a war, she's going to get one. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Patricia called me at 6 a.m., her voice tight with excitement. Eleanor, turn on the financial news. Blackstone Development Group was raided by federal agents an hour ago. I grabbed my remote and found the business channel, where a reporter was standing outside Blackstone's corporate headquarters, as FBI agents carried boxes of documents to waiting vehicles. Federal agents executed search warrants early this morning at the offices of Blackstone Development Group as part of an ongoing investigation into allegations of investor fraud and money laundering. Richard Blackstone, the company's founder and CEO, was taken into custody and is expected to be arraigned later today on charges of operating a Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors of an estimated $15 million. My phone rang immediately. Tyler. Mom, are you watching the news? Yes. Vivian's been crying all morning. She says it's all a mistake, that her father is being framed by business competitors. She wants us to hire a criminal defense attorney. Tyler, listen to me very carefully. You cannot, under any circumstances, get financially involved in your father-in-law's legal defense. Any money you spend on his lawyers could be seen as evidence that you were complicit in his crimes. But he's family. I can't just abandon him. He was never your family, Tyler. He was your predator. There was a long silence. Vivian says if I don't support her father, she'll never forgive me. Then you have a choice to make. That afternoon, Vivian called me directly. Her voice was shaking, stripped of its usual arrogant confidence. Eleanor, you have to help us. My father is innocent. This is all some horrible misunderstanding. Vivian, your father stole $15 million from investors. There's no misunderstanding. You did this. You reported him to the FBI out of spite. You destroyed my family because Tyler wouldn't give you control over his trust fund. I reported a criminal to the authorities. What happened to your family is the consequence of your father's choices, not mine. Tyler could lose his job over this. Do you understand? Nonprofits can't employ people whose families are under federal investigation. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, Vivian sounded genuinely frightened. The entitled princess routine had evaporated, leaving behind a scared young woman who was finally realizing the scope of what her father had done. Tyler can protect his job by cooperating with the investigation and distancing himself from your father's criminal enterprise. How is he supposed to distance himself from his wife's father? That's between you and Tyler. Eleanor, please, I know we've had our differences, but Tyler loves me. If you care about his happiness, you'll help us get through this. I do care about Tyler's happiness. That's why I'm not going to let you drag him down with your family's crimes. You're really going to destroy our marriage over money. Vivian, I'm not destroying anything. I'm protecting my son from people who see him as a financial resource rather than a human being. She hung up without another word. That evening, Tyler appeared at my apartment unannounced. He looked exhausted, aged by stress and the weight of impossible choices. She's leaving, he said without preamble. Vivian, she's moving back in with her mother until the legal situation resolves. She says she can't stay married to someone who won't support her family during a crisis. I led him to the living room and poured 2 glasses of wine. How do you feel about that? Honestly, relieved. Tyler slumped into the couch. I've been walking on eggshells for months, trying to keep everyone happy, trying to be the husband she wanted me to be, but I never felt like myself around her. What changed your mind? This morning she asked me to take out a loan against my trust fund to pay for her father's legal defense. When I said I couldn't do that, she told me I was just like you, selfish and controlling and obsessed with money. Tyler took a long sip of wine. That's when I realized she'd never actually seen me as a person, just as someone who was supposed to provide whatever she needed. I'm sorry, Tyler. I know you loved her. I loved who I thought she was, but that person never really existed. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness below. Finally, Tyler spoke again. Mom, I owe you an apology for believing her version of events, for pressuring you about the trust fund, for letting her manipulate me into thinking you were the problem. You don't owe me anything, Tyler. You were in love, and love makes people vulnerable to manipulation. I've seen it happen to very smart people. She called you ancient. I should have shut that down immediately. She called me a lot of things. But Tyler, do you know what she never called me? What? Wrong. The next week brought a cascade of revelations, as federal investigators unraveled the full scope of Blackstone's fraud. The Hartford development project was indeed fictional, existing only in glossy brochures and PowerPoint presentations. Investors who thought they were funding luxury condominiums, had actually been paying for Blackstone's lifestyle and his daughter's expensive taste. The elder abuse investigation against me was quietly dropped when investigators realized that Vivian had filed false documents claiming Tyler was being denied access to money that was never legally his to begin with. More importantly, they discovered that the complaint had been filed as part of a deliberate strategy to create legal obstacles while Blackstone attempted to liquidate his remaining assets. Margaret called with the final update. Vivian's attorney withdrew from the case. Apparently, he didn't realize he was being used to facilitate a criminal conspiracy. What about the restraining order against the trust fund? Dissolved. You have full control again. Not that it was ever really in question. I hung up and sat in my office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline where I'd spent 30 years building something meaningful from nothing. Vivian had called this view ancient, this success outdated, this experience irrelevant, but it was this ancient wisdom that had saved my son from financial ruin and criminal association. That afternoon, I drove out to Tyler's apartment in Queens. He'd moved out of the Westchester house the day after Vivian left, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind all the expensive gifts her family had lavished on him. The apartment was modest but comfortable, decorated with books and photos, and the personal touches that had been absent from the showplace he'd shared with his wife. "How are you adjusting?" I asked. "Better than I expected. Turns out I actually like living within my means." Tyler smiled for the first time in months. "I got a call from my old supervisor at the Veterans Program. They want me to apply for a promotion to regional director." "That's wonderful. It would mean more responsibility, more travel, but also more impact. I'd be helping set up housing programs in 3 states instead of just New York." "It sounds perfect for you. It pays well too, not Blackstone development well, but enough that I could actually save money and build something real for my future." I handed him an envelope. "Speaking of your future," Tyler opened it and found a modified trust document. "What's this?" "I've restructured your trust fund. You can access it at 38 instead of 40, but only if you complete a financial literacy course and maintain steady employment for 2 consecutive years. Mom, you didn't have to do this. Yes, you've proven that you can make good decisions when you're not being manipulated. You deserve the chance to use that money to build the life you actually want, not the life someone else expects you to want." Tyler hugged me, and for the first time in years I felt like I had my son back. 6 months later, I received an invitation to Tyler's promotion celebration at the Veterans Center. The event was small, just colleagues and friends who shared his commitment to helping others. No designer clothes, no expensive wine, no social media performances, just genuine people celebrating meaningful work. "Thank you," Tyler said as we stood together watching his colleagues share stories about the veterans they'd helped find homes. "For what? For protecting me from myself. For seeing through Vivian when I couldn't. For caring more about my future than about keeping peace in the family." "That's what mothers do, Tyler. We see the dangers our children can't see, and we stand between them and the people who would hurt them. Even when it makes us look like the villain, especially." As I drove home that night, I thought about Vivian's words from that morning in my office. Ancient, bitter old woman, stuck in the past. She'd meant those as insults, but I'd come to see them differently. My ancient wisdom had protected my family from modern predator. My bitter experience had recognized sweet lies for what they really were. My past had prepared me to fight for my son's future. Vivian had tried to make my age and experience into weapons against me, but she'd forgotten the most important thing about underestimating your opponent. The more you dismiss their capabilities, the more devastating it becomes when they prove you wrong. In the end, I hadn't just protected Tyler's trust fund. I'd protected Tyler himself from a life of being used by people who saw his inheritance as their opportunity and his love as their leverage. And I'd done it all with the ancient wisdom that Vivian had been so eager to dismiss. Some battles are worth fighting, even when the people you're fighting for don't understand why you're fighting. Sometimes protecting the people you love means being willing to be seen as the villain in their story, at least until they're mature enough to understand that heroes and villains aren't always who they appear to be. The trust fund was ancient history now, but Tyler's future was just beginning, and that made every moment of the war worthwhile. The photograph arrived in my office mail on a Tuesday morning, unmarked except for my name written in block letters across a manila envelope. Inside was a single image: Richard Blackstone in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed behind his back, being led into federal court for sentencing. Someone had written "Justice Served" across the bottom in the same block letter. I studied the photo for a long moment, noting how different Blackstone looked from the confident businessman who'd tried to steal my son's inheritance. Prison had aged him, stripped away the expensive suits and practiced charm that had masked his true nature for so long. The man in the photograph looked exactly like what he was, a common criminal who'd run out of other people's money to steal. Marcus knocked and entered with my morning coffee. "The sentencing hearing is this afternoon. 12 years federal prison, full restitution to victims, forfeiture of all assets." "What about Vivian?" "No criminal charges, but she's named as a defendant in the civil lawsuit. The victim's attorney is going after anyone who benefited from the scheme, including family members who received gifts or financial support." 12 years. By the time Richard Blackstone was released, Tyler would be in his late 40s, well past the age when young men make catastrophic financial decisions to impress their wives' family. The trust fund I'd protected would have matured into genuine wealth, managed by a son who'd learned to recognize predators before they could sink their claws into his future. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visit. Vivian stood in my office doorway, but she looked like a completely different person from the entitled princess who'd demanded trust fund access 18 months earlier. Her designer clothes had been replaced by a simple black dress that had clearly seen better days. Her perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Most telling of all, her hands showed the calluses and short nails of someone who'd learned to work for a living. "Hello, Eleanor." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Vivian, this is unexpected." She sat down carefully, her posture straighter than I remembered. "I wanted to talk to you before I left New York." "You're leaving?" "My mother and I are moving to North Carolina. She has a sister there who offered us jobs at her restaurant, waitressing, kitchen work, whatever needs doing." Vivian's voice was steady, but I could hear the effort it took to maintain her composure. "It's not much, but it's honest work." The contrast was striking. The woman who'd once demanded thousands of dollars for designer handbags was preparing to wait tables for tips. The person who'd dismissed my hard-earned success as ancient and irrelevant was about to discover what it meant to build something from nothing. "What about Tyler?" "Tyler filed for divorce 6 months ago. It was finalized last week." Vivian's hands twisted in her lap. "He was right to do it. I wasn't a good wife to him. I was too focused on what I thought we deserved instead of appreciating what we had. And now I understand the difference between earning something and expecting it." She looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, there was genuine humility in her expression. "Eleanor, I came here to apologize for everything I said to you, everything I tried to do. You were protecting Tyler, and I was too selfish to see it." I leaned back in my chair, studying this transformed version of my former daughter-in-law. "What changed your mind?" "Watching my father led away in handcuffs, realizing that every luxury I'd enjoyed for the past 10 years was paid for with stolen money, understanding that I'd been raised to see other people as resources instead of human beings." Vivian's voice grew quieter, "and watching Tyler choose his principles over keeping me happy. That was the first time I'd ever seen someone choose what was right over what was easy. It wasn't an easy choice for him. No, it wasn't, and that made it mean more." She stood up, smoothing down her simple dress. "I know you'll probably never forgive me for what I put your family through, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand why you fought so hard to protect Tyler from people like me." After she left, I sat in my office thinking about transformation and consequences. Vivian had spent 3 years trying to remake Tyler into someone who fit her family's twisted values. In the end, she'd succeeded in remaking herself, but into someone who could finally see the difference between worth and wealth. The irony wasn't lost on me. She'd called me ancient, but I was the one who'd adapted and survived while her entire world crumbled around outdated assumptions about entitlement and exploitation. That evening I met Tyler for dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the village, the kind of place where the owner knew every customer's name, and the recipes had been passed down through generations. It was exactly the sort of establishment Vivian would have dismissed as insufficiently impressive for her social media presence. "You look happy," I observed as Tyler studied the handwritten menu. "I am happy. Happier than I've been in years." He smiled, and I noticed that the stress lines around his eyes had faded. "The regional director position is everything I hoped it would be. Last month we opened housing facilities in 3 new cities. We're helping veterans who've been homeless for years find permanent homes. And I'm dating someone." Tyler's smile widened. "Her name is Sarah. She's a social worker who runs programs for at-risk teenagers. We met at a nonprofit conference, and she actually understands why I care more about impact than income. I'd like to meet her. She'd like to meet you too. She's heard a lot about the legendary Eleanor Carter who built a financial empire and saved her son from a gold-digging con artist." I laughed. "Is that really how you describe me?" "Among other things, Sarah says any woman who can survive in finance for 30 years while raising a son as a single mother must be tougher than titanium." We ordered dinner and talked about Tyler's work, his new relationship, his plans for the future. For the first time in years, our conversation flowed naturally without the underlying tension that had poisoned our relationship during his marriage to Vivian. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know about Vivian's family, about what they were really after?" I considered the question while twirling pasta around my fork. "Experience mostly. 30 years in finance teaches you to recognize certain patterns. When someone approaches you with an investment opportunity that sounds too good to be true, when someone tries to create artificial urgency around financial decisions, they're usually hiding something important." "But it was more than that, wasn't it?" "Yes, it was the way Vivian talked about you, about our family, about money itself. She saw everything in terms of what it could get her rather than what it meant to the people who'd earned it. She never asked about your happiness, only about your access to resources." Tyler nodded slowly. "Sarah's different. When I told her about the trust fund, her first question was whether having that money would change the work I wanted to do. She was worried it might make me less committed to helping people who actually need it. Smart woman. She's accomplished things on her own that she's genuinely proud of. She doesn't need me to provide her with status or luxury. She just wants a partner who shares her value." After dinner we walked through Washington Square Park, enjoying the mild evening air and the energy of the city around us. Street musicians played jazz standards while couples danced on the Fountain Plaza. Students from NYU sat on benches discussing literature and philosophy, with the passionate intensity that only comes from believing your ideas might change the world. "This is what I missed," Tyler said as we found an empty bench. "Just being able to enjoy simple things without worrying about whether they were impressive enough or expensive enough or worthy of posting online." "Vivian made you feel like your natural preferences weren't good enough, constantly. If I suggested a movie night at home, she'd want to go to some exclusive screening. If I wanted to cook dinner together, she'd book reservations at restaurants we couldn't afford. Every choice became a negotiation about our image and our lifestyle." That must have been exhausting. It was. And the worst part was that I started to believe her version of what mattered. I started measuring my worth by the size of our house and the brand of her handbag instead of by the veterans I was helping find homes. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the life of the city flow around us. Young couples holding hands, elderly men playing chess, mothers pushing strollers, artists sketching the fountain, real people living real lives, none of them performing for an audience or calculating the social media value of their experience. "Tyler, I want you to know something," I said finally. "Even when you were defending Vivian, even when you were angry with me for investigating her family, I never stopped being proud of you. Even when I was being an idiot, especially then. Love makes intelligent people do foolish things. But Tyler, even at your most foolish, you never lost your fundamental decency. You never became cruel or selfish or entitled. You just got confused about what mattered." "Thanks, Mom. That means more than you know." 3 months later, I received an invitation that surprised me. The Veterans Housing Coalition was hosting their annual gala, and Tyler had been selected as their Humanitarian of the Year. The ceremony would recognize his work in expanding housing programs across 3 states and helping over 200 veterans find permanent homes. The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, in the Temple of Dendur Hall, with its soaring glass walls and ancient Egyptian architecture. The guest list included senators, nonprofit leaders, business executives, and celebrities who supported veterans' causes. It was exactly the kind of high-profile event that Vivian would have loved, but Tyler had invited Sarah instead. I watched them together during the cocktail hour, noting how naturally they interacted with the other guests. Sarah was beautiful in an understated way, dressed in a simple navy gown that emphasized her intelligence rather than her wealth. More importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in the stories the veterans were telling about Tyler's programs, asking thoughtful questions about housing policy and addiction treatment. "She's perfect for him," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Margaret Chen, my estate attorney, holding a glass of champagne and smiling at the young couple. "I think so too. How did you know I'd be thinking about that?" "Because you're a mother, and mothers always evaluate their children's romantic choices. But also because I've been watching Tyler tonight, and I've never seen him look so comfortable in his own skin." She was right. Tyler moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, discussing his work with genuine passion, introducing Sarah to colleagues and supporters with obvious pride. He'd found his place in the world, and it had nothing to do with trust funds or family wealth. It was built on his own efforts, his own values, his own choice. When Tyler was called to the stage to accept his award, he spoke about the veterans he'd served, the colleagues who'd supported his work, and the systemic changes needed to address homelessness in America. His speech was eloquent and heartfelt, focused entirely on the mission rather than his personal achievement. But most of all, he concluded, "I want to thank my mother Eleanor Carter, who taught me that true wealth isn't what you inherit, it's what you build with your own hands and give away with your own heart." The applause was thunderous, but I barely heard it over the emotions swelling in my chest. This was the son I'd raised, the man I'd always known he could become once he stopped letting other people define his worth. After the ceremony, Tyler, Sarah and I went to a quiet bar near Lincoln Center to celebrate. Sarah ordered wine, Tyler chose beer, and I stuck with scotch. We toasted Tyler's award, Sarah's recent promotion to program director, and the future they were building together. "Eleanor," Sarah said during a lull in the conversation, "Tyler told me about everything that happened with his ex-wife. I want you to know how much I admire what you did. I just protected my son. You did more than that. You showed him what it means to have principles that matter more than keeping peace." In my work with teenagers, I see so many kids who've never had an adult willing to be the bad guy when necessary. They grow up thinking that love means never having to face consequences. It's not easy being the bad guy, no, but it's necessary sometimes. And the fact that Tyler learned to recognize manipulation and stand up to it probably saved him from making the same mistakes again. Sarah was wise beyond her years, and I could see why Tyler had fallen in love with her. She understood that real relationships were built on mutual respect and shared values, not on what one person could provide for the other. "Sarah, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Tyler's trust fund will be accessible in a few years. How do you feel about that?" She thought for a moment before answering, "Honestly, I hope it doesn't change anything about who he is, or what he chooses to do with his life. Money can be a tool for good if it's used wisely, but it can also be a trap if it becomes more important than the work that gives life meaning." Tyler reached over and took her hand. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." "But," Sarah continued, "I also hope Tyler knows that whatever he decides to do with that money, I'll support him, whether he wants to expand his nonprofit work, invest in other causes he cares about, or put it away for our future children's education. As long as the decisions come from his heart and his values, I'm with him." Our future children, the casual way she mentioned their shared future told me everything I needed to know about the strength of their relationship. These were two people building something together, not one person trying to use the other. 6 months later, Tyler called with news that didn't surprise me but filled me with joy nonetheless. "Mom, Sarah and I are engaged. Congratulations. When's the wedding?" "Next spring. We want something small, just family and close friends. Sarah's parents are flying in from Oregon, and we'd like you to host the rehearsal dinner." "I'd be honored." "There's something else. We've been talking about the trust fund, and we've decided what we want to do with it." I waited, curious to hear how they'd resolved the question of Tyler's inheritance. We want to use half of it to start a foundation focused on veteran housing and mental health services. The other half will invest conservatively for our future family's security. But Mom, we want you to be on the foundation board. Your financial expertise and your understanding of how to protect assets from people who might misuse them. It was a perfect solution, one that honored both Tyler's values and his financial security. More importantly, it was a decision they'd made together, based on their shared vision for their future. I'd be delighted to help. And Mom, we want to name the foundation after you, the Eleanor Carter Foundation for Veterans Service. I was quiet for a long moment, overcome by the generosity of the gesture. Tyler, that's not necessary. Yes, it is. You saved more than my trust fund, Mom. You saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't have been able to live with. This foundation will help hundreds of veterans, and it exists because you were brave enough to fight for what was right when it would have been easier to give in. The wedding was everything Tyler and Sarah had wanted: intimate, meaningful, and focused on the promises they were making to each other rather than the spectacle they were creating for others. The ceremony was held in the garden of a small inn in the Hudson Valley, with 40 guests seated on wooden chairs arranged in a semicircle around a simple arch decorated with wild flowers. Tyler wore his father's wedding suit, altered to fit him perfectly. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, a classic design that emphasized her natural beauty without overwhelming it. They'd written their own vows, promising to support each other's dreams, to build a life based on service to others, and to never let material success become more important than their love for each other. I sat in the front row watching my son marry a woman who saw him exactly as he was and loved him for it. No performance, no pretense, no pressure to be anyone other than the thoughtful, passionate, dedicated man he'd always. During the reception, I found myself standing on the inn's terrace, looking out over the valley as the sun set behind the mountains. The sound of laughter and conversation drifted from the dining room where Tyler and Sarah were celebrating with the people who mattered most to them. "Beautiful evening," said a familiar voice. Margaret Chen joined me at the railing, holding a glass of champagne. "It really is. You know, Eleanor, I've been practicing estate law for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of families destroy themselves fighting over money, but I've never seen anyone handle a situation like yours with such grace." "I'm not sure grace is the right word. I was pretty ruthless when I needed to be." "That's exactly what I mean. You were ruthless in protecting what mattered, but you never lost sight of what actually mattered. Tyler's happiness, his integrity, his future. The money was just a tool to protect those things. The money was never the point." "Exactly. And that's why Tyler is celebrating his wedding tonight instead of visiting his mother in prison for financial fraud." I looked at her in surprise. "Prison, Eleanor? If you'd given in to Vivian's pressure, if you'd released that trust fund early, Tyler would have lost everything: the money, his reputation, possibly his freedom if investigators had decided he was complicit in Blackstone's scheme. You didn't just save his inheritance, you saved his life." Later that evening, as the reception wound down, Tyler and Sarah approached me on the terrace. "Mom, we wanted to thank you," Sarah said, "not just for tonight, but for everything you've done to make this possible. For fighting for us even when we didn't understand what you were fighting against," Tyler added. "For showing us what it means to love someone enough to be the villain in their story when necessary," Sarah continued. I hugged them both, these two remarkable people who were about to build a life based on everything I'd hoped my son would value: love, service, integrity, and the wisdom to recognize the difference between wealth and worth. "Just promise me something," I said. "Anything," Tyler replied. "Promise me you'll remember this moment, this feeling of being exactly where you belong with exactly the right person, doing exactly the work that matters to you. When life gets complicated, and it will, remember that this is what real success looks like." They promised, and I believed them. 2 years later, the Eleanor Carter Foundation for Veterans Services had helped over 500 veterans find permanent housing and employment. Tyler had been promoted to National Director of Veterans Programs, and Sarah was completing her doctorate in social work while managing a statewide network of youth services. They bought a house in Brooklyn, a modest brownstone that they renovated themselves on weekends. No designer furniture, no expensive art, just books and photographs and furniture that told the story of their life together. Tyler's award plaques hung next to Sarah's degrees, surrounded by pictures of the veterans and teenagers they'd helped along the way. I visited them often, usually bringing groceries for dinner, and staying to help with whatever project they were working on. We'd cook together, talk about their work, discuss books we'd read, and places they wanted to travel. Simple evenings that reminded me why family mattered more than the performance of family. One evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Sarah showed me a letter that had arrived that morning. "It's from Vivian," she said. "She wanted us to know that she's doing well in North Carolina. She's managing the restaurant where she works, and she's engaged to a local teacher. She says she wanted to thank Tyler for showing her what real integrity looked like." I read the letter, noting Vivian's careful handwriting and thoughtful words. She wrote about learning to find satisfaction in honest work, about building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than financial convenience, about finally understanding the difference between love and transaction. "She sounds like a completely different person," I observed. "People can change," Tyler said. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to figure out what actually matters." "Do you think you'll write back?" "I think so. Not to rekindle anything, but to let her know I'm glad she found her way to a better life." That night, as I drove home through the city I'd called home for 40 years, I thought about ancient wisdom and modern problems. Vivian had called me ancient as an insult, dismissing my experience as irrelevant to their contemporary life. But it was exactly that ancient wisdom, accumulated through decades of watching people make the same mistakes in new ways, that had allowed me to see through her family's sophisticated con game. Every generation thinks it's invented desire, discovered ambition, pioneered the art of wanting more than they have, but the patterns are always the same: predators looking for prey, manipulators exploiting love and loyalty, people mistaking what they can get for what they deserve. The difference isn't in the schemes themselves, which remain depressingly consistent across decades and centuries. The difference is in learning to recognize them, to trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and to value long-term security over short-term peace. I'd built my career on understanding that markets are driven by human psychology, which never really changes: fear, greed, hope, desperation, the desire to believe that easy money is possible and sustainable. The same emotions that drove the tulip bubble in 1637 drove the tech bubble in 2000, and would drive whatever bubble came next. But I'd also built my life on understanding that some things are worth protecting, regardless of the cost. Tyler's future, his integrity, his ability to choose his own path based on his own values, rather than someone else's expectations. The trust fund was ancient history now, but it had served its purpose, not just as a financial safety net, but as a test of character for everyone who came into contact with it. Vivian had failed that test spectacularly, revealing herself as someone who saw Tyler's inheritance as her opportunity rather than his security. Tyler had eventually passed the test, choosing his principles over his wife's pressure, and Sarah had passed it before she'd even taken it, treating Tyler's future wealth as a responsibility rather than a prize. As for me, I'd passed the most important test of all: the willingness to be disliked, dismissed, and demonized in order to protect someone I loved from people who would hurt them. Ancient wisdom, bitter experience, outdated principle. Vivian had meant these as insults, but I wore them now like badges of honor, because it was exactly these ancient qualities that had saved my son from a future of being used by people who mistook his love for weakness and his generosity for stupidity. The young might have energy and optimism, but the ancient had something more valuable: the hard-earned knowledge of how the world really worked, and the wisdom to act on that knowledge even when it made them unpopular. Tyler was 37 now, happily married, professionally successful and financially secure. In 3 years, he'd have full access to his trust fund, which had grown substantially under careful management. But more importantly, he'd grown into the kind of man who would use that wealth wisely, as a tool for good rather than a symbol of status. That was the real victory: not the money I'd protected, but the man I'd helped my son become. Someone who understood the difference between worth and wealth, between love and transaction, between building a life and performing one. Vivian had called me ancient, and she'd been right, but she'd forgotten that ancient things endure for a reason. They've survived because they work, because they matter,
because they represent wisdom tested by time and proven by experience. My ancient principles had defeated her modern schemes, my bitter experience had recognized her sweet lies, my outdated values had saved my son from her cutting-edge manipulation, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Tyler was free, happy and whole. His trust fund had become ancient history, but his future was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.